There are so many choice moments through your explanation here where you could replace what you're saying with frog, and it would just be hilarious. Like he goes down into Hades with his slave frog, and he and his slave frog take turns dressing up as frogs. Is that where this is going, or? Episode 10 was very significant for many reasons. However, I think we have to admit that episode 13 of Station 13, I mean, that's I think that deserves a golf clap.
Station 13, episode 13, it's actually more significant than you might realize.
How so?
Because, yes, it has a number in common with the name of this podcast. But I'm not sure if you've noticed, but we record every 2 weeks. And there are 52 weeks in a year.
Right.
Thus, there are 26 fortnights in a year.
Right.
Which is how many we record in a year. So the fact that we're on Station 13, episode 13 now means that we've been doing this for 6 months. This is the exact half-year mark.
Wow.
It doesn't seem like 6 months.
A lot's happened for me over this past 6 months. So for me, it actually does feel like 6 months since we started, actually.
Right, yeah. You're like you're in such a different position
yeah.
in both physically speaking and mentally.
That's right. I mean,
spiritually.
Yeah, when we first started this, I was leaning over my MacBook Pro somewhere in West Japan in a hot, non-air conditioned room in the middle of the Japanese monsoon when we first started it. So I was like sweating, and there was I remember I had to be very careful with the intensity of the only source of relief that I had from the climate, which was this little electric fan sitting on the floor. And there were frogs outside. Do you remember me talking about the frogs?
Oh yeah, the frogs. Yeah.
Yeah. So actually now I've gone from basically more or less like indoor camping, which is how I would describe living in most Japanese houses, because their construction is very, very lightweight, obviously, to deal with the earthquakes that they have in Japan. So you really, really get intimate with the weather outside. If it's hot outside, it's going to be hot inside. If it's cold outside, it's cold inside. So if it's raining outside, you definitely know about it. However, I've gone 6 months later now to here in Sweden, where the architecture is very solid, and I'm sitting behind a triple glazed window here, surrounded by insulated bricks and, of course, acoustic paneling, as I mentioned last episode. And I have absolutely no idea what the weather is outside now. Actually, this evening I went out. I decided I might go for a walk after dinner. Got my pants on, and because working at home, that means work uniform tends to be tracksuit pants. So I put on some proper pants and shoes and got my jacket out and said, right, I'm going for a walk by. Open the door and it's pouring with rain, and I had no idea. So I've gone from being very, very close to the weather to being somewhat distant from it. So anyway, we have a little bit of follow-up from last episode.
We do. Some more follow-up on the security stuff. We've kind of run a bit long on the Facebook model security thing for the last couple of episodes, so I'll keep it short. But the friend of mine that I mentioned once before, who is somewhat more knowledgeable than I am about these security-related matters, was listening to what we were saying and what Charlie posted on the Reddit about the way that shops track you. And he said that he was aware that this happened, but that he didn't mind, which was an interesting sort of thing. Because I think for most of us coming in without the knowledge, it's a bit of a shock. And we're like, that's a good point. I'd never thought of that. Oh, that's a bit creepy. But he said, well, actually, as I was saying last time, the important thing you have to do is determine your own threat model and also what you're willing to live with in terms of your privacy. Because I guess there's a distinction between privacy and security here. But in terms of privacy, you decide your own comfort level. And he said he didn't mind so much that they were collecting this aggregate data about movement through the shop, because what they're not doing is seeing when you go to a shelf and you pick a book up off the shelf and read a few pages and put it down. They're not tracking which book you picked up or how many pages you read or anything like that, right?
Right.
They're just seeing an overview of your route through the shop. So, he said, well, I can live with that, which I thought was fair enough and kind of interesting. Funny enough, the new Amazon bookstores, of course, do base some of their stuff on tracking exactly which pages you've read out of a book, because, as we mentioned in the episode where we talked about that, they have a section in the Amazon bookstore which is books that have been completed within 3 days by readers reading it on the Kindle,
Right.
which they call page turners. So that's another interesting angle on that. The one other thing that I wanted to put a link in the show notes, I won't talk about it now, but there's a good overview about the crack Wi-Fi hack or Wi-Fi exploit from Kudelski Security. And what I liked about this page is that it's very short.
Right.
It just tells you sort of the nuts and bolts of the problem and how it's being dealt with. It assumes that you understand a lot of the buzzwords and things, so it's not written to be approachable to the layman necessarily. But if you have a little bit of a background in just how networks work and things like that, then it's a good thing to just read to get an overview of the situation. And then anything you don't understand, you can sort of look up afterwards. So that's good. I'll stick a link in the show notes.
Okay.
Okay, and then the other thing that we talked about, of course, was science fiction.
Yeah. So we actually last episode was riddled with factual inconsistencies, and two of those. Well, actually, it was not really a factual inconsistency, but we couldn't remember the name of the boy character in Terminator 2, who turns out to be
so embarrassing.
I know.
I was immediately afterwards. I listened back to the audio, and I was thinking, "What are you talking about? It's John Connor. It's the whole basis of the movie.
That's right.
He's not the boy. He's not a random boy.
Right.
He's John bloody Connor." What? In my defense, and this is not much of a defense, but in my defense, I wasn't really listening.
Right.
I already had it. I already had in mind what you were going to say next, which turned out to be wrong.
Right.
Because I thought you were going to mention the scene where the Terminator calls John Connor's mother, foster mother,
Right.
and it's the T-1000 that is pretending to be her.
Right.
And he checks the name of the dog and then says the wrong name to find out whether it's really her or not. I thought you were going to reference that scene, and so I was ready to sort of just skip over it and talk about that scene. And I didn't really stop and think, hang on, he's talking about John Connor.
For some reason, I remember the name Edward Furlong, which of course is the name of the actor who played John Connor. But
Right, which I never was even really aware of.
yeah, strange. The other rather embarrassing error that I made last time in talking about supposedly my favorite movie of all time, which is the original Tron movie, I said that it was from 1984, actually 2 years earlier, 1982.
I think that's fine. I don't think you need to be embarrassed about that.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I mean, the earlier that, 1984 and 1982, if you were around in the 80s, I was, and I was pretty young, but somehow 1984 was very different from 1982. So,
Well, yeah. I mean, there is one crucial difference, of course, between 1984 and 1982.
is that
A vast improvement in the state of the world between those 2 days.
that's Return of the Jedi? Hadn't come out yet?
No, I hadn't.
Ah, I see. I see. Yeah, actually, sometimes I forget that I'm actually older than you. I better.
Yeah.
I'm not doing.
There's your reminder.
Yeah, not doing too well, am I?
I think in an episode where we both forgot the name of John Connor, you can forgive yourself getting the release date of Tron wrong by 2 years.
Yeah.
We've got bigger problems to worry about.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, 82, 84, I remember. So I was in primary school, and the big thing was, did we talk about this before? I think we did, didn't we? But the big thing was marbles. Yeah, that's right. We did talk about it.
We had a whole show about marbles. Yeah. We named the episode after.
Paper planes, yo-yos. Yeah, so those were the days. Anyway, 1982, not 1984.
Yeah. Oh, and one more link, which I'll put in the show notes, and I also won't talk in detail about now, because I take it you still haven't seen the new Blade Runner film, have you?
No, I have not. And I, as the father of a 3-year-old and an 8-year-old, I don't think I'm going to be seeing it anytime soon.
Okay, so I won't talk in too much detail about it, but for those people that have seen it, I'll put a link in the show notes. There was this really interesting article. Obviously, I have a sort of strange skew at the moment towards the classics, but there's an interesting article I saw on the Eidolon site, and it gave an analysis of Blade Runner 2049 from a classical perspective, which drew parallels with certain famous classical myths and literature, mainly the Trojan horse, but also Oedipus Rex, which is very famous, and also Pygmalion's statue Galatea, which is less famous. They're not trying to make the claim that the film is based on these stories. They're just noticing sort of certain similarities and similar themes and using that as a new sort of perspective to understand the film, which is an interesting thing to do, whether the director intended it or not. It also included some feminist critique of the film, which I hadn't considered. That's not the main thrust of the piece, but it's also sort of interesting. There's some interesting insights there. And the main thing is that the title of this article was "Do Androids Dream of Electric Greeks?"
Right.
Excellent headlining there.
Yeah.
So very good title and very good article to go with it. So I'll link in the show notes.
Fantastic. One thing that's happened recently here in Sweden is we have come out of daylight saving time.
Ah, yes. You're a week earlier than us. America's... I wish they'd sort of get these things aligned, because for 1 week only, the difference between the time zones is different, right? You're a bit closer to us than usual.
Yeah. Is it just me, or do you find daylight saving time very bizarre? I suppose it's practical, and I grew up in a place where there was daylight saving, and, it was always fun in the family being the official clock setter on the day that the time changed and having to run around. These days, actually, I figure there's probably less clocks to worry about these days, because a lot of people use their phones, which do all that automatically, and their computers, of course.
These days, I frequently don't even realize that it's happened, because I have an alarm set on my phone. The phone automatically overnight adjusts the time and turns on the alarm when it's appropriate. And I look at the time, it's the same time it always is. I get up, I go to work. I might think, oh, I'm a bit tired this morning, or, oh, I rested very well last night. I feel quite fit and ready to go. But I don't even notice. And then I get like halfway through the day and I see an article about it. It's like, oh, that's what happened.
Yeah. I knew that daylight saving was around this time, but that's how I knew that it was last week on the day that it actually changed, just because I noticed that my phone was 1 hour out of sync with everything else in the house. And then I suddenly realized. But it's amazing the difference that 1 hour extra a day can make. Maybe, I don't know, maybe I'm getting older. Maybe it's a sign of, parenthood, especially because it was on a weekend. It's a day that I would be spending with my children. Just 1 extra hour in the day. It actually really felt apparently like 1 extra hour to the day. Everything sort of dragged on a little bit longer. Oh, it's only 2:30. When you think, it feels like it should be 3:30 or 4:30, or I'm kind of hungry. Isn't it dinner time yet? No, it's not. It's only, 4:30 or whatever. It was quite interesting, actually, how, the difference that just 1 hour can make. And I guess makes sense, really, when you go through your life living every day, being used to having a certain amount of time from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. Having that suddenly extended is kind of almost like a jet lag kind of experience.
Yeah. I mean, well, yes, very minor jet lag, but it is as if you've traveled from the UK to, or France, I suppose. They're the next time zone across, aren't they? Which isn't that far.
Yeah. Of course, being from Adelaide, we are privileged to have our own time zone. We're one of the odd ones which is bumped by 30 minutes.
Oh, no, you're not one of those. Oh, God. Do you know, programmers hate you.
Oh, really?
Like, there's almost nothing so frustrating in this world as trying to be a programmer dealing with time zones. And there are all sorts of problems with time zones. And one of them is you people. Half an hour. What are you doing?
I know. We're also very privileged because, when you look at lists of GMT time and you look at, sort of select your time zone, you go through the very glamorous choices like New York and Paris and London and Los Angeles and, these very glamorous places, and Hong Kong and Tokyo and Adelaide.
Adelaide.
There it is.
Adelaide.
Where is...
It's not more glamorous than Adelaide.
Yeah.
You've got the Grenfell Tower.
Or Adelaide. Get it? See? Adelaide. Delayed. Delayed.
Oh, it's delayed
Yeah,
by half an
yeah,
hour. Oh,
that's
yeah.
good.
Yeah.
That's not very good. But actually, Australia is actually a very funny one for time zones because I'm not going to try and remember exactly how many time zones it has, but I think it's something on the order of 5.
Really? Well, it's big. I mean, it's very big, Australia. I'm sure you're aware of this.
Yeah. It's I think it's about 5. Like generally in Australia, you only really think of it as being 3. You know, you got Perth time. Well, I guess being from Adelaide, you have
Right.
Perth time, South Australian time, and then time on the eastern seaboard. But I think actually, if you look it up, it's actually something like 5,
Right.
which is
Yeah.
kind of bizarre because I know that I think South Australia, which is where Adelaide is,
Yeah.
has its own 30-minute time zone, whereas the state or the territory directly north of it and
Right.
more or less on the same longitude, which is called the Northern Territory,
Yeah.
is a different time zone, which is really weird.
Time zones are weird. I mean, have you seen a map of time zones plotted across like a
Yeah,
world map?
I have. It's kind of jagged.
Right. It's nonsense.
It'd be interesting to know actually how the history. What I guess there must have been at some stage, some kind of referendum that takes place in all these parts of the world. You can see like various, for example, China. China is a huge country, and yet there's a very quaintly cultural feeling to the fact that they've opted to have one time zone for their entire country.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Which is amazing because it is a really huge country, and that means that people way out on the west side of China must have some pretty funky sunrise and sunset times, I would imagine.
Right. Yeah. I mean, they get pretty offset, but you can also sort of see it kind of makes sense for a country like China that they would be like, no, we're going to unify everything.
Right.
I mean, and the other extreme is before GMT. I mean, not so long ago. I don't know if it was mid or late 19th century that these time zones got a bit more organized. But certainly in the age of steam, when trains were first becoming a thing, there were time zones within the UK. They weren't zones. Like cities pretty much set their own times, I think. So you would get on a train from London to Bristol and you would have to change your watch when you got in. Like the clock at the train station would show a different time.
Right.
Because Bristol had a different time. Greenwich Mean Time was sort of, I think, invented to unify these time zones in the UK. And then because at that time, the sun never set on the British Empire, as they used to say, they then, with Greenwich Mean Time at the center, they then sort of decided on a unified time around the British Empire. And I don't know how that then went to other countries, whether that was by agreement or by following it or what the story is. But yeah, I don't know. And I'm not trying to claim that time zones are a British invention because I have no idea. But I do know that originally they weren't even a thing within the UK. Like the notion that everywhere in the UK is the same time is a relatively modern notion, let alone everywhere in China.
Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating, isn't it? It's such a simple thing. I am a bit curious why they need daylight saving in Sweden because, when you get into the winter, the sun is coming up at, like 10 o'clock and going down at like 3 o'clock anyway. So, I mean, is it, if that was 11 o'clock and 4 o'clock, is that such a, huge difference when it's such a short amount of time that you're getting daylight anyway?
Right. Yeah. I don't know if there's a European agreement involved here as well, because there is a European agreement involved with time zones. Like I think the sort of Central European time is they've agreed that they're going to have daylight savings at the same time. Like that's why your daylight savings happened at the same time as in the UK and in the rest of Europe.
Right.
I think. And that is on purpose. Whereas America is, I don't know if it's always a week out, but it's always, it's usually somewhat offset from Europe.
Right.
So maybe, I don't know, but maybe European countries have to have daylight savings time. There are movements to abolish it, like certainly in the UK, in the US as well, I'm sure other countries. There are movements to do away with it because people think that it's not useful anymore, that it was more useful when our society was more agricultural.
Right.
It still is, I think, mainly for the farmers that it exists. But I don't know. Having lived in Japan, which doesn't have daylight savings time, it never puts its clock back or forward.
Right.
Before I moved there, I had heard of these movements to do away with it. And I'd thought, it's a bit of a pain, but it doesn't seem worth the effort. You know, it's fine. Like, I don't feel particularly attached to it, but whatever. I turn my clock back once a year and I turn it forward once a year. But then living for 7 years in a country that doesn't have it and just not thinking about it at all, and then moving to America and suddenly being faced with it again, it just seems like really archaic all of a sudden.
I know what you mean. And also exciting at the same time. You know, there's just like last week, wow, there's like 1 extra hour in the day. That's great.
Right.
And also my son was very amused by it because this is the first time he's ever experienced daylight saving and you know, time changing like this.
Right.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I'm very excited. I wanted to share with you this episode's science tip. It's a little bit technical, but it's such an elegant solution to a problem using some very basic electronics. This is to do with an audio problem that I was having.
Right.
And I'm really excited to explain it to you. So this is it's exciting because it's just so simple. So here we go. In this room that I'm currently sitting in, previously I did not have a ground connection. So the power points were old style Swedish power points that actually were not grounded to anything. And because I run in here, I run, you know, 2 computers and some monitors and some fairly power hungry speakers. I decided to have a friend come along to fit a ground line, which actually turned out to be very simple. He just took off the plug, and actually there was a ground wire behind the power point. It just wasn't connected to anything because the...
Oh, yeah, I think that is quite common.
Yeah.
But I think they probably have to install it sort of ready when they're building the house, but not necessarily to expose
so
it.
the actual plug itself was very old, and that's why it didn't accept a ground line, but there was one there, so it was just a simple matter of wiring up a new modern power point with all 3 wires into it. So I had a ground connection, which is great, and I immediately discovered that I was getting very loud buzzing noises coming through the speakers. This is otherwise known as a ground loop. And it's caused basically by, this isn't the fun bit that I want to explain because I don't really understand this that well, but it's funny because, you know, the main things that are grounded in this room are the monitors, the displays, that is, and my speakers and the computer itself. And you get this, some people may have experienced this, where if you move the mouse, you can actually hear it through the speakers.
Oh, yeah.
And if the hard drive does something, you can very audibly hear it coming through the speakers. And that's exactly what was happening. And this is a ground loop. And apparently, I don't really understand the physics behind this, but apparently it's caused by devices that are grounded with different potentials, and that creates a loop of some sort. I don't really know. Maybe somebody can explain that to us on our Station 13 Reddit. Anyway, the solution to a ground loop, it's often difficult to pinpoint where the interference is coming from and why it's happening. There are a number of things that you can do. You can try and plug your different grounded pieces of equipment into the same power board if they were not in the same power board. So it's all going through the same ground line. The cause for my issue was much more simple. And that was that I have been using unbalanced cables to go between my audio interface and the speakers.
Unbalanced cables, what does that mean?
So this is really cool. Danny, this is really cool. So just to cut to the chase, I went out and bought some balanced cables connected to the speakers, and now I have blissful silence and blissful grounded silence at that, which is extra safe, extra silent. Anyway, balanced cables. So I guess the 2 basic kinds of cables for audio that most people will be familiar with is the typical guitar instrument cable style, which is otherwise known as a 1/4-inch jack.
Right.
And the other is a microphone cable, which has a male end and a female end. So the 2 ends of it are different, and it has 3 prongs inside it instead of, you know, one big thing that you stick into a hole.
Yeah, the 3 thick, rounded sort of prongs, right?
So that the microphone cable, that is a balanced cable. And the way that it works is really simple and ingenious. It's all to do with phase cancellation. So when you have two signals, one with the phase inverted, it's just like saying +1 added onto -1.
Right.
And you get 0.
And you get a flat, yeah.
So if you have, for example, a sine wave, and then you flip it upside down, flip the phase upside down, and then you add it back to the original, you get nothing.
Right.
And that's called phase cancellation.
That's how noise-cancelling headphones work as well, isn't it?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so the noise-cancelling headphones and the Apache helicopter as well.
Oh yeah, that's clever.
Yeah, it's they have some very, very amazing processes in there that can output a more or less instantaneously can output a phase inverted signal of the ambient sound around them in order to make it sound a little bit like the background noise is being cancelled out. Anyway, balanced cables. So the way that it works, there are 3 prongs. One is a ground line, but the other 2 are active. Now these 2 send the signal down one, and then down the other one is an inverted version of that same signal.
Right.
And at the receiving end, the equipment on the receiving end of the signal will take the normal signal and it will take the phase reversed, polarity reversed signal and flip it and add them together to get a very strong version of the original signal.
Is that just like double amplification?
Yeah.
Right.
Now, the cool part is that as the signal travels from the source to the destination, along the wire, it picks up interference, right? It picks up noise.
Aha.
Now, you've probably already picked this up.
Okay, I think I can see where you're going with this.
Yeah. So the cool part is that both wires inside the balanced cable will pick up the same interference. So that means when it gets to the destination and one of those, the inverted one, is flipped around, the original signal comes back twice as strong.
And the noise gets cancelled out.
Exactly. Both cables have exactly the same noise running because they both get the same interference, but in phase, even though the out of phase one, it's actually causes when it flips it around at the destination, the reverse polarity version now contains an out of phase version of the noise that came down the line.
Of the noise, yeah. Oh, that is clever.
Yeah, and that gets added back onto the in-phase version of the noise that came down the line from the other wire, and the result is you get a nice strong signal from the source and all of the noise completely cancelled out.
Right, yeah. Oh, that's cool. Science on Station 13.
Yeah.
So, very, very basic science, I'm sure, but I've never really thought about it before.
Yeah, I was when I plugged these balanced cables in and everything was nice and quiet, I was so happy that I thought, well, this is like magic. How is it that these things actually work? And that's how they work. And that's also the reason why microphone cables, one of the reasons that they are made, the standard is balanced cabling is for that. The other reason, of course, is that microphone cables can therefore run a lot longer. You can have much longer microphone cables without any degradation in the signal.
Right. Because the noise will be cancelled out and the signal will be amplified.
Yes. So there you go. Science in action.
There are 2 new members to the Wright household. I'm going to send you a picture of them now.
Okay. Ah, look at that.
Look at that. This is hot off the press as well. I have yet to post this on the social media.
Look at those guys.
But we have some kittens in our house.
Adorable.
They're called, well, we haven't 100% settled on the name, but we seem to be settling on Natsu and Fuyu.
Okay. You should probably explain what Natsu and Fuyu are for our listeners who don't speak Japanese.
So, yes. Well, I will see about putting this picture up on the interwebs in case there were not enough cat pictures on the internet, and posting it somewhere so I can put it in the show notes.
Maybe on our Reddit there, Danny. I don't think I've ever seen cats on Reddit before.
No, that'll be we might be breaking new ground here. So, Natsu and Fuyu are brothers. They're littermates. And they seem to be some sort of Siamese, maybe tabby crossbreed mix. It's difficult to say because, we got them from a shelter, and the shelter somebody just found them on the street when they were like a few days old and handed them in. So nobody knows the history or the mother or anything like that. But we can tell that one of them that they are probably of Siamese stock, because one of them looks like a Siamese cat, right? It's white with dark points at the end of his tail and paws and a little bit on his face. And the other one just looks like a normal tabby cat, completely not like a Siamese at all. But because they're brothers, that's where the link can be made. And so Natsu and Huyu mean summer and winter respectively. So the Siamese-looking one, the white one, is obviously winter. And then the other one is summer.
Gorgeous.
We went to the shelter last weekend. So actually the weekend before last, we were down in Campbell and we'd gone down for the farmer's market, but the farmer's market wasn't on that week because it was Oktoberfest. So there was like a special event and they'd closed the whole street and they had all sorts of stores. And one of the stalls there was this animal shelter. And we've been talking on and off about maybe getting a cat for a long time. So this animal shelter had a stall. They had a couple of cats there that you could play with. And we thought, oh, maybe we should go and visit the shelter, just to have a look and start to think about what this would entail if we decided to go ahead with it.
Dangerous.
Yes. So we went last Saturday and we spent most of the afternoon there. We were there for hours playing with all these different cats. And went home, decided to sleep on it, but we had already met these two and really liked them. And the next day we went back again. And we were only, we weren't originally planning on getting any cat. We were just going to look. But if we were going to get a cat, we were only planning on getting one.
Right.
But because these two were brothers and had been together their whole life and were obviously so happy and comfortable in each other's company, it seemed a shame to tear them apart. So we ended up taking both of them. And I think that's actually turned out for the best because we're new to cats. We haven't had cats before, neither of us.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so this is all new to us. And the good thing about having two is that they can entertain each other.
Right.
So you might think that it would be more effort to have two, right? But it actually turns out to be quite a lot less effort because you can just leave them to their own devices and they'll have fun together. Whereas if you've got one, then you've got to be playing with it, especially when they're kittens, they've got a lot of energy and you've got to play with them quite a lot so they can kind of exhaust all that energy.
Right.
So it's turned out quite well having two, and it's been very fun, nice playing with them. So you were talking about how just an hour makes a lot of difference, but I've been getting up very early all this week so I can have some time playing with the kittens before I go to work.
So what happens when both of you are out?
So at the moment, the kittens are confined to the guest bathroom.
Oh, okay.
The recommendation is that when you first get a cat, I think any cat, but especially kittens, you start off with just one room and you let them become totally comfortable and happy in that room. And then you slowly, over the course of about a week to 10 days, introduce them to the rest of the house. So the first day they came in that day and overnight they were in the bathroom. The second day we took them out into the living room for an hour and then put them back in the bathroom. And then yesterday and today, I think they're getting 2 hours or so out in the living room.
What's the reason for that? Is it that it's too overstimulating or something? Or why would that be recommended?
It's partly because it's too overstimulating and partly because you want to give them a place that they know is safe, that they can always go back to and they won't get lost going back to.
Oh, okay.
And that's both for them to feel safe and for them to have a nice place that they, feel comfortable in. And also for the more practical reason of to make sure they know where the toilet is.
Oh, I see.
Because if you introduce them to the whole house at once, they might sort of go exploring far afield and then kind of forget where they are and not know how to get back to, where the litter box is. And then you're in trouble. So
I see.
The idea is to slowly introduce them to the rest of the house so that they kind of learn the layout of the place as they go. And they become comfortable with the whole place that way as well.
That's interesting that cats should need... Yeah, because my experience, we used to have a cat in Australia. It wasn't a kitten. It came to us. It was a wild cat that kept on hanging around our house.
Right.
And we started to give it food and sort of it gradually became sort of domesticated through that. So there was never any issue with it being inside or outside or that cat could definitely take care of itself.
Right.
But it's interesting the amount of, I guess, parenting and nurturing. It makes sense, really. I mean, a young little kitten like that there's no reason for it to understand these things, I guess, but
Right.
that's rather surprising. It's interesting.
It's also very disconcerting for them changing environment. So,
Right.
and the whole journey as well. Like, unlike dogs, who quite often enjoy being in the car and going out to exciting new places, cats find the whole thing very disconcerting and uncomfortable, being put in their little carrier thing and having to stay cooped up in the car, for the journey, and just the bumping and everything of the ride.
Right.
And then when you open the case, they're in a completely different environment with different smells and different sounds and a different layout than they used to.
Right.
And the whole thing is quite disconcerting for them. So you want to sort of give them some time to get comfortable and realize that this new place is safe and they can be happy there.
Is that what happened to you? Like when you opened the carrier when you got home, were they reluctant to come out?
Well, ours actually were not so bad. Like, this is partly things I've been reading on the internet. I'm trying to sort of do my research properly so that we know what we're doing. I don't want to be, a lot of irresponsible owners just buy the thing because it's cute and then have no idea how to look after them, which is the case for me as well. But I'm trying to sort of rectify that. Ours are great though, because especially Natsu is so sort of adventurous and likes exploring.
Right.
So they came out quite cautiously, and we left them to their own devices in the room for an hour or so when we first got home, just so they could slowly explore it at their own pace before we went in to spend time with them.
Right.
But they adjusted pretty quickly, and they seem very happy there now. When we first opened the door and let them out into the living room, it took a while before they decided to step out, and they quite cautiously sort of stepped out. And then we've got quite an open space in our living room at the moment. We've got a sofa on one end and a TV on the other end, and then in between is just empty space.
Right.
And on this first day, the cats would sort of scamper over from the bathroom, which they know and love, to under the sofa. And then they'd kind of look around for a little while, and then they'd find the spot under the kind of entertainment unit under the TV and dart over to that and then be underneath that for a bit. But they spent very little time in open space until they'd kind of got used to the whole room.
Did they tend to stick together or did they move separately?
A bit of both, They do like being in each other's company, I think. And I think it's reassuring for each of them when they know where the other one is. But they also kind of both got interested by different things and went off to explore them independently. So
right.
They do a lot of play fighting and things at the moment as well. So they're kind of chasing each other around. And I think the living room is probably the biggest space they've ever had to do that in.
Yeah.
Because at the shelter, the room was smaller than our living room. And obviously our bathroom is as well. So it suddenly gave them a lot more freedom to really run after each other.
Yeah. How do you teach them to go to the toilet in the same place?
Well, luckily for us, the shelter already basically did that for us.
Oh, okay.
Cats naturally are fairly fastidious. Like, cats don't like dirt and things, and they clean themselves.
Right.
And they just instinctively want to cover up their mess.
Right.
Which is why sort of litter boxes always have that sand stuff in it.
I see.
So they can sort of scrape it over. So they are naturally inclined that way anyway. But I don't know what the process of litter training is like, because these two are 2 months old and the shelter had already trained them for us by the time they came here. So when they sort of were first exploring the room and they found a box with the sand stuff that is in litter, they're like, oh, this looks like a good spot. I'll use this.
Oh, that's good. Have you ever had dogs before or other cats?
I haven't. No, I've not really had any pets except when I was young. I had a budgie for a while or two.
Right.
But other than that, no, I've not really had pets. I know my dad used to have a dog when he was growing up, but...
Do you generally class yourself as a dog person or a cat person?
I'm definitely a cat person.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I've wanted cats my whole life. I love cats, but I've just never had them.
Right.
I don't know why exactly, but I've always kind of got along with cats. I find that if I go to other friends' houses who've got cats, they tend to sort of come to me fairly quickly. And, I don't know. I like them. They seem to like me well enough. So
Do you class yourself as a cat person or just not a dog person? Because I'm definitely not a dog person.
Oh, really? No, I'm a cat person first, but I quite like dogs. I mean, it's funny because I always thought I didn't like small dogs. I always thought small dogs are just such a stupid waste of time. Like, why not just get a cat, right? And if you're gonna have a dog, get a proper dog. But of course, our former coworker had a dog and used to bring him into work, which was a toy poodle.
Right.
Which is both a small dog and a very silly small dog.
Yeah, it's quite ridiculous.
But I loved that dog. I used to go to the back room just so I could play with that dog because I thought it was great.
I remember.
So despite my apparent aversion to small dogs, I really like that one. So no, I like dogs. I like dogs as well, but I'm not anti-dog, but I don't feel the same sort of affinity. Like a lot of people, and my wife, for example, will see a dog, and including small dogs like chihuahuas and things, and sort of melt a little bit and say, oh, it's so cute. Oh, look, it's doing this cute thing and whatever.
Right.
And I don't feel that so much. I don't feel that sort of emotion towards dogs in the same way that I do towards cats. I enjoy playing with dogs. Like, I find that fun, but I don't think I feel the, oh, look at it being cute emotion so much with dogs. I don't know why, but it does leave me cold. Like I sometimes feel it's a bit funny that I am that unmoved by this thing.
Right. That's interesting, isn't it? Because I'm exactly the same as you. I'm 100% a cat person, and exactly the same as you. Whenever there is a cat in a place that I go, I naturally gravitate towards it and just want to touch it and play with it, and and I find cats extremely lovely and cute and all that, and dogs exactly the same as you, the exact opposite. It's like I just have no interest. Actually, my reasoning was a little bit different. When my mother, when she was very, very young in China, she had a very traumatic experience once when she was a very small girl being chased by a very large dog.
Right.
And that had really kind of scarred her for life, I guess, to put it idiomatically, in that she has always been very, very scared of dogs, to the point where, if she's going for a walk and there's somebody approaching from in front, walking a dog coming towards her, she'll often get very, very nervous and scared in that kind of situation, even if the dog is on a leash, or if it's an older dog that is clearly much more calm and less likely to, run up and climb up her or anything like that. So as her son, those situations, I think it's interesting. I see it in my own children too, that, a new situation, a child will look to the parents to see what the expected reaction is in this situation. And because my mother was always, oh, it's a dog, let's go on the other side of the street, or, like that.
Right.
That kind of implanted in me this programming that dogs were scary and dogs were big and they'll come up and they'll lick you, and they'll sort of climb up onto you, and maybe they might scratch you a bit, and it's just sort of a kind of a fear, very, very unjustified, because myself, I'd never had any personal experiences or negative interactions at all with dogs, but it's just sort of programmed that way from a young age. And so when I got older, it took a while to realize, and still now too, if I go to somebody's house and there's a big dog there, I just sort of, it's hard to fight that instinctive feeling that, I should be scared. There's like this large dog walking around.
Right. I think that is fairly common. My sister got bitten, I think, by a Rottweiler when she was 5 or 6 or something.
Right.
And so she was very scared of dogs for a long time. I'm not sure if she still is, but I wouldn't say I'm scared of dogs. I don't have that. And I quite enjoy it when a dog sort of enthusiastically comes up and climbs up you a bit and, is panting and excited and wants you to pet him and all that.
Right.
I do enjoy that side of things. That's what I mean when I say I'm not anti-dog. I'm not like, that doesn't make me scared and I don't want to avoid that situation. But I just don't feel that kind of emotional response that a lot of people feel to dogs, which I definitely didn't get from my parents, because my dad really likes dogs. He had dogs growing up And when he goes, when we go as a family to somebody's house and there's a dog there, he'll quite often sort of play with it and pet it and really visibly enjoys, being in the presence of a dog and playing with the dog. So if I was going to copy from my parents, it would be that, I think. So for whatever reason, that's not it in my case. I don't know what the reason is, but maybe just because I feel a loyalty to cats.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It's like Japanese people often, this is a typical safe topic to discuss with people when you're going out for a drink or something, is, are you a cat person or are you a dog person?
Right.
Actually, it's interesting when you were saying that dogs seem to lack that basic appeal. I actually used to be exactly the same with children.
Yeah, a lot of people are.
Yeah, I also found, I guess maybe I'm the younger of two boys in my family and never really had any cousins or any babies around or anything like that. So I never really knew how to react with children, what to do, or how to be with them or anything like that. And maybe that's the reason, but I also just never really found children sort of cute or appealing or lovely or precious. Obviously, you understand the importance of children and the significance of children and the wonder of children, but I just never felt any attraction there at all until I had my own.
Right.
And I've heard this exact same story recounted from somebody with regard to his dog as well.
Right.
He said as well that before he had his own dog, he never really understood what all the fuss was about.
Right.
And having his own dog from the puppy stage was sort of the eye-opener. And now, like myself with children now, after having two of my own, now I find all children just extremely, extremely adorable.
Right. Yeah, I think that would be the case. And I think, funnily enough, for my wife, I think originally is more of a dog person than a cat person. This cats thing, she was sort of going along with me originally. But now that we have them, she was saying, I've never really understood other people's cats. But we've had these cats for 2 days and already I feel like totally connected to them and totally sort of protective and supportive of them and like I can guess what they're thinking, sort of thing. And it's funny how quickly these things take hold of you.
Cats as well, although they primarily are interested in themselves, more or less, compared to a dog, who's often more responsive and more sensitive to people around. Cats definitely, as they get older, they definitely do form very, very strong connections with the people that they live with. The humans that they live with, I should say. So I'm sure you're going to experience that too. What do you feel about the idea of having a cat who only knows indoors?
Yeah, it's a funny thing. In America, at least, there is a very strong push towards indoor cats. All the shelters very strongly recommend that you keep your cat indoors and you don't allow it to go outdoors. All the charities recommend it. All the shelters recommend it. Most of the vets seem to recommend it.
So why would they recommend? Is it a safety thing?
It's primarily a safety thing. Yeah. There's a lot of dangers outside, obviously, between cars and other animals and just getting lost. Like there's a lot of potential problems. A lot of the animals that go into these shelters have come from some of these situations where they've wandered out and they've got lost and things. And these days, if you have a pet, it's got a microchip embedded in it so that it can be identified if it does get lost.
Right.
But nevertheless.
So I guess if these professional institutions are recommending it, it must be fine. But I'm curious about the health aspects.
Right. And when I first heard the idea, I thought it seemed a bit cruel, but apparently not. Apparently it's quite healthy. Some people who have gardens build almost like a hutch, like you have a rabbit hutch in your garden. They build areas in their garden which is cordoned off so the cat can't leave, but it does get the experience of being outside.
Right. Yeah, I mean, don't cats need sunlight, like vitamin D?
Well, they need sunlight, certainly, yeah. We won't be keeping them locked up in our bathroom forever, right? But they can get sunlight by the window. They don't actually have to go outdoors to get that.
I guess so. Do you get vitamin D from sunlight behind glass?
I think so, yeah.
Really?
I mean, if it's polarized glass, then no. But it's not. So no, I'm pretty sure you do.
It is interesting. I mean, again, as the only cat that we had when I was growing up in Adelaide was a wild cat, and therefore perfectly fine outside.
Right.
So we had this, we were fortunate to have a very, very large garden, which he used to enjoy doing all kinds of things in a big area of lawn. And just the idea of an animal being inside and not knowing outside
Right.
is somewhat unfamiliar to me.
Yeah, I know. I mean, it did seem unusual to me at first too, but it's recommended, and we're going to follow that advice, and we'll see how it goes. It is a bit of a worry for us. The front door of our apartment opens into the kitchen living room area, which is the biggest area in the apartment, right? It's a fairly open, apart from the bedrooms and the bathroom, the whole thing is open. So we are a little bit worried about how we can prevent them from, when they have free roam of the house, how we prevent them from darting out,
right?
When we come home and we open the door. And that is, there are various approaches that people take, trying to discourage them from going near the door by spraying sort of citrus sprays because they don't like the smell, or putting aluminium foil because they don't like that either, or making an awful sound by the door, or going with the positive sort of carrot rather than stick approach of associating the sound of the door opening or the doorbell with there being a treat on the other end of the house. So whenever they hear that sound, they run in the opposite direction.
Oh, that's interesting.
So there's various, bits of training you can do, but we're still sort of looking into that, and that's all new to us. So
it sounds like
it's a learning process.
From the way you describe the personality of Natsu, it sounds like that may be an issue when he gets a bit more used to the...
Definitely. I mean, the first time we opened the bathroom door to go in and visit him, he ran straight out and was running around my office.
Oh, right.
So, yeah, he's definitely that way inclined, but we'll see how it goes. Did you see the letter I put on Twitter? I'll put a link in the show notes. This is my correspondence with someone from Wizards of the Coast customer support.
I did not. So what is Wizards of the Coast?
Have you ever played Dungeons and Dragons?
Of course. Actually, sorry. No, I have not played Dungeons and Dragons. I've played Advanced Dungeons and Dragons.
Okay, well, that's what I meant. It was called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons for a while. That's what it was called when I started playing it as well. So did you play first edition or second edition?
It was the first edition.
Oh, okay. Cool. So Advanced Dungeons and Dragons was a game by TSR Inc., which was spawned out of Dungeons and Dragons. The original game was called Dungeons and Dragons, which featured a board and was much more oriented around moving around on the board and having combat on that board.
Right.
Advanced Dungeons and Dragons took that notion, but took away the board, or made it optional, and had it much more about the storytelling and the role-playing and just describing the scene to each other.
The good stuff.
Right. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition just sort of clarified some of the rules and changed some of them. And I've never played 1st edition, so I can't really compare them that well. But 2nd edition came with an explosion of campaign settings.
Right.
Which were box sets of all different worlds that you could have your adventures in. And they would tell you all about the geography of that world. And some of them would have different kinds of races you could play, and different creatures and different kinds of monsters. Right. And
so generally
different characters and so forth.
Basically kind of supplemental stuff for the Dungeon Master to make the creation of the world and these campaigns and the gameplay a little bit easier to start off. Is that correct?
Sort of. I mean, yes, it meant that the Dungeon Master didn't do the world creation bit.
Right.
But I wouldn't necessarily say made it easier. It just changes the focus. Okay. So you have this world already made for you. It's as if instead of having just the core Advanced Dungeons & Dragons rule set and then making up the towns and everything yourself, you were to say, well, we're going to use these rules to play the game, but the game is going to be set in Middle-earth.
I see.
So all this history and all these locations and these particular races of the hobbits and the dwarves and the elves and stuff and their cultures already exist.
I see.
And you are going to create new characters and new stories within this pre-existing world.
It's kind of like middleware.
Right, exactly. And that was really popular during the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd edition era, which is when I started playing it.
Right.
In the sort of mid to late 90s. In 1998, 99-ish, TSR was in some financial trouble. And Wizards of the Coast, who make the card game Magic the Gathering, among other things.
Ah, okay. I know that.
They bought the Dungeons & Dragons franchise from TSR.
Oh, okay.
I think they bought TSR itself, maybe. TSR went out of business, and Wizards of the Coast ended up with Dungeons & Dragons.
Right.
And they decided to remove the advanced part of the name and make Dungeons & Dragons the name of the advanced game.
I see.
Because it had already been over 15 years now since, the original Dungeons & Dragons was just a board game.
Right.
But they didn't reset the numbering. So the first product that they released was called Dungeons & Dragons 3rd Edition.
Ah.
And I had already kind of stopped playing by this point, so I never played 3rd Edition. I stopped with 2nd Edition.
Right.
But 3rd Edition came out, 3.5 came out, which just was a revision of 3rd Edition, but apparently a big improvement. 4th Edition came out, which is much maligned, and everyone says is they tried to tune the rules of 4th Edition using computer simulations instead of the traditional just playing lots of games and seeing what was fun.
Right.
And that led it to be a very good game if you wanted to play a strategic game by the numbers, but a lot of people found it to be a bit cold and less interesting.
I see.
And then they came out with 5th edition 3 years ago, just over 3 years ago. And that was running up to my 30th birthday. And I saw that it was coming out and I got quite excited. And I decided to buy Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition in the run up to my birthday. And we played a game of it that was what I did for my 30th. So it's like my nice big birthday party was this nostalgic trip back to Dungeons & Dragons, which I hadn't played since the last time I played actually was on my 18th birthday.
Right.
So it was an interesting sort of exactly 12 years later.
Right. Was it good?
Yeah, it's great. I really like 5th edition. I think it's good. The only thing that I think is a bit sad is that all these expansions that existed for 2nd edition, they've all kind of disappeared and been consolidated. So they mainly focus on the Forgotten Realms world, which was one of the most popular worlds for 2nd edition games to be set in, but is a fairly standard fantasy-based setting.
Right.
And some of the sort of crazier worlds that you got in 2nd edition, like Dark Sun and Planescape, two of my favorites, those don't really exist anymore, which is unfortunate. But the way the game feels strikes a good balance between the rules, but still focusing on the story and the kind of game. You can choose how much you want to move towards a story-based game or a by-the-books rules-based game.
Right.
And it's fairly well balanced, I think. So I'm pretty happy with it. There was a problem, though, with the initial printing of these books, which is that the binding was very bad on some of the first players' handbooks that they printed 3 years ago when the new edition came out. And obviously I bought one of the first, because I bought it basically on release, right? So I bought one of this first printing run. And so within a couple of months, I found that big chunks of the book had fallen out.
Right.
And I was quite upset about this, but I sort of struggled on and sort of, at times it was useful because we only had this one player's handbook to share between us. And so if two people wanted to read different sections of the book at once, I could take out this chunk and pass them one section.
Handy.
But it did make it annoying to flick through the book, So anyway, that was 3 years ago, and I've sort of been quite busy moving to America and things since then, so I hadn't really thought about it. But I heard recently that Wizards of the Coast were actually fairly good about dealing with this problem because it hadn't just been me, it was a widespread problem in this initial printing run.
Okay.
And I thought, well, it was 3 years ago, and I bought the book, I imported it to Japan from America. So I'm a bit of a dodgy case, and I don't think I stand much of a chance here. But I'll try writing them an email anyway, and I'll put some photos of the book and just say, I've heard that you're accepting returns of these and replacing them. So, would that be possible? And within a day, I got a reply from their support team. And not only did they offer to send me a new book, they didn't even ask me to send this one back.
Right.
They're just sending me a brand new copy of the book. No questions asked. But he sent me this whole message in character. It's like, I am Adam, Knight of the Rose, or something like
Right.
that. And he's saying, those blackguards have managed to destroy your book. That's terrible. I will ask the clerics of product return to forge you a new one, and things like that. And from anyone else, I would think, oh, this is such corporate nonsense.
Right.
Like, that sort of thing would really annoy me.
Right.
But from the people making D&D, I loved it.
that's
I was
great.
like, this is brilliant. So I sent them a reply also in character.
That's fantastic.
So I'll put a link in the show notes to that correspondence because I thought it was very funny. And they have now sent me the tracking number for my new copy, and it will be arriving this Friday. So I'm very excited. 3 years later, and they're willing to replace my player's handbook, which, okay, it's their fault that the original sort of fell apart a little bit.
Right.
But it's absolutely my fault that I left it 3 years before contacting them.
Right.
So I would have been not particularly surprised if they'd said, no, sorry, we can't do that. So
Yeah, that's great.
It's just very good customer service. And I love the fact that they decided to do the whole thing in character as well.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I mean, that on so many levels, it shows that the person who's working there, I mean, I'm sure they don't have like this binder of customer support policy that says that, Appendix 3, Section A says that you must respond to these inquiries in character. I'm sure that just evidence that the person who's working there is just having a good time.
Right, yeah. I hope so. I mean, it could be because, this is a known issue and a lot of people have written in with this problem. It's entirely possible that they have a template that is written like this.
But even so, the fact that...
Even then, I don't care. The fact that they sort of try to do that they want to have that kind of connection and a little bit of fun.
Yeah.
I just think it's great.
Yeah,
so
and that's
I was very happy with that.
Yeah, it's fantastic, the power that really good customer service, where it feels very personal. It can actually have, can take a negative and make 2 or 3 positives out of it.
Right, definitely, yeah. Because I'm so excited to receive my new copy now, and I really want to sort of get on and play another game. And finally the Japanese translation of the Player's Handbook is coming out this December.
Oh, really? Wow.
So it's taken quite a while because at first they weren't sure if they were going to release a Japanese edition. D&D is a little less sort of famous and popular in Japan than it is here, but they decided to do a localization, which is great. The Player's Handbook comes out this December, and then the Dungeon Master's Guide and the Monstrous Manual will follow in the new year. So
I think it's fair to say that we are in the middle of a little bit of a renaissance for board games and for tabletop gaming in general. I think that
it's true, and D&D in particular, not least because it's featured quite heavily in Stranger Things, the Netflix series.
Right.
And so a lot of people have been introduced to it for the first time through that.
I didn't play. I mean, I played AD&D with my brother and his friend. I think like once, twice. So they're not that familiar with that. But the one role-playing game that I think I can recall playing also with my brother and his friend a few more times was the GURPS system.
Oh, GURPS.
GURPS. Cursed.
What is that? Generic Universal Role-Play System.
Yeah, that's right.
Something like that. Right?
Cursed with like the most awful name. This is back before, branding was a thing. Where these days you could never get away. Well, actually, who knows? I mean, you can get away with names like Google and Yahoo and Twitter these days. So I suppose maybe GURPS could still survive on in the current climate. But yes, GURPS was basically a very, very simplified role-playing system, which was designed to be generic in the sense that you could transplant any kind of context or setting or genre on top of it.
Right.
And it would just take care of the basics of interactions and characters and their statistics and stuff like that, and attributes and equipment. And then it's up to the GM, the Game Master, I believe it was called with GURPS.
Right, yeah, it's fairly common.
To basically sculpt whether you want to have it science fiction or you want to have it fantasy or current world or whatever. It's all up to you. And so my brother had all these really cool books, the GURPS. There was like these sort of expansion sets, again, kind of like what you were describing of AD&D 2nd edition, where basically the system is here. They don't change the system that much, but, here is some additional supplemental assistance if you're wanting to have, this kind of setting or this kind of setting. And he had various, there's some science fiction ones, but one of the more memorable ones that I used to love looking through the book of it was called Auto Duel. And Auto Duel was appropriate for my brother and myself at the time because we were well into an Apple II game called Auto Duel.
Oh, okay.
Auto Duel is kind of like a Mad Max, like the original Mad Max, sort of dystopian, post-nuclear, desert warfare, oil warfare kind of setting. The original Auto Duel game on the Apple II was fantastic. It was kind of like a top-down driving game on this rather fictionalized map of North America. So you have these different North American cities in there. For example, Detroit, and there was like Syracuse, and I can't remember the names of the other ones, but they're all kind of in different locations and not geographically accurate intentionally.
Right.
And then, you drive through the wilderness, and as you're doing that, of course, you are at risk of being attacked by other CPU-controlled oil pirates, I guess you'd call them. People basically trying to shoot your car and steal it for parts and stuff like that. And then when you get to the cities, you can upgrade, you can buy parts for your car to upgrade it, or you can buy different types of cars like trucks or motorcycles or things like that. And then on top of all this was a larger story, like a mission, which if you go into the bars in the cities and sit there and talk to people, they'll give you hints about things that you're supposed to do, and there was a bigger game to it as well. So that was Auto Duel on the Apple II. It was a great game. So the GURPS role-playing version was also great, and it was basically taking the GURPS system and then just giving the game master information about easy ways to create vehicles and vehicle statistics and vehicle attributes and things like that.
Right.
Did you ever try GURPS?
No, I never. I mean, the place that I used to get all my roleplay books, which was the Model Centre in Stratford-upon-Avon, which had sort of half roleplay books and things, and the other half was like Warhammer 40,000, Warhammer Fantasy, and another sort of model, but that's why it was called the Model Centre. But and upstairs was a comic book shop. So good sort of nerd triumvirate in there. But they always had a lot of the GURPS books, but I never played those. I did play, in terms of sort of systems that worked across games, did you ever encounter the World of Darkness books?
No.
Or games?
No, I didn't.
Those are by White Wolf Publishing, and they are things like Vampire the Masquerade, Werewolf the Apocalypse, Mage the Ascension, Changeling the Dreaming, things like that.
Right.
And they are all actually set within one world. They're not a generic system that you can play in a lot of different worlds.
Right.
But the idea is that this is a sort of Gothic mirror of present day modern Earth.
Right.
Where there really are vampires and there are werewolves and there are all these things. And they each used a system called the D10 system, whereas Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, you would get these little boxes of 6 different types of dice. If you count the D100, which is just a D10 with an extra 0 on it, as a 6th one, 5 or 6 different types of dice. And you would have to use different dice for different things, and depending on your class, like you hit points are either using a D4 if you're a mage or a D6 if you're a priest or whatever. In this, you used a D10 for everything, and you just varied the number of D10s you rolled.
I see.
But those were interesting because they were a little bit more adult than a lot of the Dungeons and Dragons games that we played. I mean, Dungeons and Dragons is very flexible, so it can be as adult or as sort of happy-go-lucky as you like. But with Vampire the Masquerade, for example, it's very political. You had these different factions of different groups of vampires. You had, different belief systems, and they had a sort of hierarchy and structure, and there were rules about not revealing the existence of vampires to humans. And then there were these 2 overarching groups, were the Masquerade and the Sabbat, where the Masquerade were the main groups that the players would play, which had all these different factions within them, but still all believed in this common idea that in order for vampires to continue, it was paramount that they don't reveal themselves to humans and they try and coexist alongside humans. Whereas the Sabbat had another few factions underneath it, and they were sort of the bad guys generally. They believed that vampires were superior to humans and humans were would just meet, and they should be trodden down and farmed or whatever.
Right.
And you could have these quite political stories where there's a lot more talking than fighting and things like that.
Right.
Or you could have quite combat-based stories as well. But they were and then sometimes you would have links with the other, like the werewolf, the apocalypse. Vampires and werewolves were always at war. So that was just a great world. And they released a series of books called Something by Night. So you would have like Tokyo by Night, or London by Night, or New York by Night, and it would be an expansion that would give you all information about that particular city.
Right.
And so it would be based on a real world city, but it would tell you which vampire is in charge, is the prince of that city.
Right.
In Vampire the Masquerade, when you go to a new city, you're supposed to first present yourself to the vampire prince of that city. And then, they will link you up with the people you need to talk with and who the leader of your faction in that city is and stuff like that. So, and they would have sort of these things were all quite unified so that these things would be interconnected, right? The London by Night and the New York by Night, the princes of these two cities know each other. And sometimes there would be things going on in the story that impacted another city. So it was all very interesting. And then the live role play got very popular with Vampire. So with the live role play, it would be set wherever you were doing it, right? Live roleplay LARP is where you actually dress up in character and you're actually acting out the actions, right?
Okay.
Rather than sitting around a table, things like that.
Right.
And the funny thing about that is you would go, if you went to London to play the Vampire live roleplay there, it was London and it had, a prince who was a player who was in charge of the Vampire Society in London.
I see.
And they would actually hook you up with people. And sometimes these different groups organizing these live roleplay sessions in different cities would collaborate on the stories.
Wow.
And so they would know that somebody is going to be visiting from Bristol, for example.
Right.
And the DMs of the London live roleplay group and the Bristol live roleplay group would talk beforehand and decide how the stories are going to be linked. And it was very sort of real in a way, which is quite interesting.
Wow.
It's like a real world MMO.
Yeah, that's interesting. My it's quite possible my brother may have had a few of those books. My only exposure to role-playing games, other than playing a few times, was my brother used to enjoy collecting the rule books for role-playing systems.
Right. Yeah.
And the ones that I used to love looking through, I just love looking at the artwork inside these books. The Robotech one he had, which had some fantastic concept art in it, and mecha art. Also, Star Wars, of course, the Star Wars role-playing.
Oh, yeah, I never played that, but I remember that.
I never played it, but I looked through those books so many times because they had such cool pictures of the, the Y-wing and the A-wing and the things that you don't really ever get a chance to properly look at in the movie that much. You can see like these nice blueprints of these different kinds of ships. And the other one was one called Palladium. That book was full of really cool pictures of, the different kinds of fantasy weapons and flails and morning stars and all these kinds of funny, eclectic weapons that a 10-year-old like me at the time would have no clue about.
Yeah, Palladium is another one that I flick through in the shop quite a lot, but I never actually bought. The only other one I think that I actually played a bit is Shadowrun. Have you heard of that?
No, wait a moment. Why do I know the name Shadow? That's a game, isn't it? Shadowrun?
They made a video game afterwards, but it's originally a roleplay game.
Okay.
And it's a science fiction one. I think you'd like it. I really want to play it again because I can hardly remember it. I played it a little bit with some people. I never actually DM'd a Shadowrun game, but I was a player. And
we should do it.
Yeah, it's a really interesting setting. I'm interested to sort of read back on it now. I mean, I think they've released new editions. I think they're up to the 5th edition or 6th edition of that now as well.
Right.
But at the time that I was playing it, the internet was really, I mean, this was like 1996, 97.
Right.
So the internet was just starting to become a thing, that there would be internet cafes that you could go to, and it was, reasonably common for people to have the internet in their own house, but you still had to dial in with a modem and things like that.
Right.
It wasn't all BBSs and things like that. So Shadowrun seemed much more futuristic and sci-fi. The idea of you would sort of jack into this network and then you would be in the network and doing things, and you had all hackers and stuff, and there was this sense of being sort of jacked into the network and then being in the real world and stuff. A bit like the Matrix, I think. I'm not remembering it. I've got a very hazy memory of it, but that notion of there being this sort of parallel world which is in the computer, which is like an interconnected network.
Right.
And the thing is, all of that is just so much more real now, right? I mean, the internet, as it stands now, is not far off being a kind of parallel world that is an interconnected network. I mean, we're not all jacking into it with VR or anything.
Right.
But I wonder whether going back to the version that I used to play, which I think was second edition as well, might have been first edition, I'm not sure. I'd probably recognize it if I saw the front cover. I wonder whether that would seem dated now.
Possibly.
Because the world that we inhabit has changed so much.
Possibly, because I mean now, with Ghost in the Shell and Tron, of course, Tron obviously in 82 was one of the very earliest incarnations of that whole paradigm.
Right.
But the idea, jacking into the network, that kind of, also, of course, William Gibson.
Right.
Now, possibly, maybe not so fresh anymore, but as a role-playing game, of course, even if the setting is a little bit cliched, I mean, look at what D&D does for a cliched fantasy setting.
Right, and it's kind of almost nostalgic now. I mean, maybe the newer editions deal with this, maybe the newer editions sort of create this science fiction setting on the basis of where we are now. But
should be really interesting.
There is something kind of nostalgic about going back to that kind of 80s vision of the future, as it were.
Yeah. Love it. That kind of retro futurism is one of my all-time favorite artistic hobbies, really.
Yeah.
Just before we leave role-playing games, I wanted to ask you, for the benefit of people listening who've never tried a role-playing game and are curious about it. So we won't bother with, what a role-playing game is, because I'm sure most people have at least that much of an understanding. But what would you recommend if we have a listener who's really curious and enthusiastic and would like to try out role-playing? What would you recommend that such a person do to get started?
D&D, definitely, hands down. I think the 5th edition of D&D, which I think is good. I haven't played it nearly as much as 2nd edition, so I can't really say, I don't have as detailed a critique of it as I know what's good and bad about 2nd edition. But 5th edition is enjoyable to play, but the rules are much more accessible than 2nd edition rules. So it's, fairly easy to get into.
Yeah, that I imagine would be a concern, because somebody who's never tried role-playing games, you look at these big, thick manuals and you sort of think, well, if I'm going to get a few mates around, have a few drinks, hey, let's try D&D. It doesn't seem like, something that could be done so casually and easily like that. It seems like there's a fair amount of commitment to learning everything and understanding it and then creating a campaign for your friends to play in. Is that fair?
Well, there is, but 5th edition has what's called a starter set, which is a box set, which has a very slimmed down book for the players and one for the DM, and comes with a pre-written adventure.
Oh, I see.
So it's got everything you need to get started. It's got enough rules for the players to play this first adventure. It doesn't go into full detail on all the magic and all the things that happen at higher levels once you've been playing a long campaign and you've leveled up your character a lot.
Right.
But it has everything you need to get started and the basic rules of combat and all of that. And it's got everything the DM needs to run an adventure without too much preparation. And I think it might even have some pre-generated characters. So although it does tell you everything you need to make characters, if you don't want to spend the time, which can take, it can be a big job rolling up your first character.
Yeah.
If you don't want to do that and you just want to dive straight in, it is possible to do. So I would say get that starter set. I'll put a link in the show notes and go from there. But then, if you enjoy it, then you would need to get just one copy of the player's handbook to share between a group is kind of enough. Everyone doesn't need to own a copy. It's helpful if you own a copy because you can read it at home and sort of look up the rules and make your own character before you go and things like that. But you don't need it. You can just have one copy, which you will share. And then the Dungeon Master's Guide is another big sort of hefty book. And that's really helpful if you want to be writing adventures and coming up with your own campaign settings and things like that. But it's not essential to get started. So you could do without it for the first little bit if you wanted to. Or if you want to dive straight in, you could get the DMG and the Monstrous Manual straight away and just start writing adventures. And the Monsters Manual will give you a whole bestiary of creatures to choose from to put in your adventures. So
one other thing that you can have a look into if you get into it is, I don't know the exact name, but there are a few really good apps for iPhone and for iOS, iPad and other tablets too, I'm sure, and websites, I believe too, which can actually help you with sound effects and ambient music for your role-playing campaigns.
Right. Yeah, I've seen some of those. There's also a couple of apps which are good for managing your character sheets and things, although I still kind of tend to stick to paper for those.
Right.
And there's an app that I quite like for a dice rolling app if you're playing in a place where it's inconvenient to carry all these different dice with you,
right,
or if you just haven't bought the dice yet. This app is quite good because it's modeled after the calculator app that comes on the iPhone.
Okay.
But it's got buttons on it for all the different kinds of dice. And so you can just put in like D6 plus 4
right,
and things like that, whatever the roll is that you have to make, or 2D4, where that means 2 4-sided dice plus 7, for example.
Right.
And then you can keep pressing the roll button and it will re-roll, it will generate the random numbers for whatever the dice are, and then it will do the other, additions or subtractions, whatever you might need to do.
That sounds like a fun app to have even if you aren't going to be doing role-playing.
Yeah, it's a good, because I was looking for dice rolling apps, and so many of them make the awful mistake.
I know what you're going to say.
Of trying to make a 3D simulation of dice. And they're all made in Unity. There's nothing wrong with Unity, but they've made this whole little world which is just a box in Unity,
right,
and they've 3D modeled all the different kinds of dice,
right,
and then you choose the dice and you throw them and they roll around, and it's so
you shake the phone,
it just winds me up, because not only is it like really slow and annoying to use, but it's not very good randomness either, right? Because it's
right,
randomness on a computer is hard, and there are various algorithms to try and do it in a good way that will give you a good distribution across the various values that you might get. And Unity's physics simulation is not one of them.
Right.
So I hate all those. But this app is just quite minimal and looks like a calculator and is useful. And so I like it.
Yeah.
It has adverts on it by default, which are annoying, but you can pay to have the adverts taken out.
Let's pay.
It's good. So I'll put a link in the show notes.
Yeah, I knew where you were going there, that I knew that it was going to be something where you like shake the phone and then the die rolls around on the screen, and it's like at that point, you may as well just be using a real thing. I mean, is that why you want to have a dice app, so that you can see the dice there on the screen and feel familiar? No, I'm sure there are more practical reasons why you'd want to have a dice app as opposed to an actual small block that you could just put in your pocket.
Right. I mean, there's something fun about the physical act of rolling dice, right? And that's why I think I would prefer to use real dice than to use a dice app. But if you're going to use an app, I want something that makes the best use of the medium, right? That takes, okay, this is an iPhone, it's got a touch screen, it's got this much space, and I'm making, essentially a random number generator for it. What is the most useful way I could present this? And the person who made this app, I think, is a really good idea. Just make it look like a calculator and allow you to enter the same formulae in the same format that it's written in the rule book. So you just look in the rule book, it says, Fireball 3d6 plus 2 or whatever.
Right.
And you just type 3d6 plus 2 and then just press the roll button as many times as you like. I mean, it's, I think that is what clever design is, not just blindly mimicking the real thing.
Yeah. Well, this is another topic for another time, I think, but the line between skeuomorphism, as the trendy kids like to call it, which is basically designing something to look realistic and flat design. I think this discussion is kind of slightly cooled down recently. It was very, very big back when Apple's iOS 7, I think it was, came out, which was did away with all of the realistic looking graphics for the interface and made it all kind of flat and minimal. So that's a topic for another time.
Yes.